I never thought I'd be caught sneaking around my own office building after hours, but there I was, heart hammering, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, trying to make sense of the weird noises coming from the basement. My job's usually pretty straightforward. I work in marketing for a mid-sized tech company downtown. I'm the guy who schedules meetings, writes copy, and generally keeps his head down during the 9 to 5 grind. But that night, something pulled me back to the building long after everyone else had left, and that's when I ran into him. I was supposed to have left at 6, but I stayed late, working on a pitch that just wouldn't come together. Around 8, I realized I'd forgotten my wallet at my desk, so I snuck back in through the side door, trying not to think about how stupid it was to be trespassing. That's when I heard it. A faint shuffle, like someone moving boxes or cleaning something. I figured it was just the janitor doing his rounds, which should have been normal, except the janitorial staff was supposed to be off by 7, and this was definitely after hours. I followed the sound down a corridor I barely ever use, the air getting colder and smelling faintly of bleach and old carpets. Then I saw him, this guy in a janitor's uniform, pushing a cart loaded with mops and cleaning supplies. He looked up, startled, and their eyes met. He had this calm, almost knowing look that made my heart skip. I wasn't sure if it was because I was caught or because there was something else there, something strange and familiar. He smiled gently and said, "Hey, I think I've seen you before." I blinked. "Really? I don't think so." "Yeah, not here. Somewhere else." That's when things got weird, because this guy wasn't just some random janitor. There was something about his voice, low and steady, like he was telling me a secret. And his eyes, they held a sort of kindness and maybe a little mischief that I couldn't place. I wanted to ask where we'd met, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if I should be creeped out or curious, but I couldn't just walk away. Something about him felt like an invitation, like there was a story behind those tired eyes and that beat-up janitor's cart. So, yeah, that was the night I met the janitor after hours. And honestly, I've been trying to figure out who he really was ever since. I stood there, frozen for a second, trying to figure out what to say. The janitor's smile didn't fade, and honestly, that made me feel way more awkward than it should have. I mean, how do you even respond to someone telling you they've seen you somewhere else, somewhere you can't quite remember, maybe in a dream? I finally joked, trying to lighten the mood even though my voice sounded more unsure than I wanted. He chuckled softly, not in a mocking way, but like he appreciated the attempt. Maybe, or maybe in a place that doesn't exist anymore. I blinked again, the mystery deepening. "What does that even mean?" He shrugged, pushing his cart slowly toward the stairwell. "Sometimes people cross paths in odd ways. Places don't always have to be real for connections to stick." By now, my brain was doing somersaults. I wanted to ask him more, but there was something about his calmness that made me feel like I was stepping into a story I wasn't ready for. So instead, I just followed him, a few steps behind, down the dimly lit staircase that led to the basement. The basement was the kind of place no one ever wants to spend time in. Flickering fluorescent lights, a faint smell of damp concrete mixed with cleaning chemicals, and rows of dusty shelves holding forgotten office supplies. But for some reason, standing there with this guy felt less lonely than I expected. "So what's your name?" I asked, hoping this would ground me back in reality. He smiled again, a little wistful this time. "Eli. Eli," I repeated, trying to commit it to memory. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you, Mark." He didn't say anything else for a moment, just watched me like he was waiting for me to say something more. I realized I wanted to know everything about this guy, even though I barely knew him. It was dumb, but it felt like a spark I hadn't felt in a long time. "Why are you still here?" I asked, nodding toward the janitor's cart. "I thought everyone was done by now." Eli glanced at the cart, then back at me. "Sometimes it's not about what's scheduled. Sometimes you have to finish what's unfinished." That was vague, but there was something poetic about it, and I found myself wanting to hear more. Before I could ask, the lights flickered harder, and for a second, the basement plunged into darkness. I swallowed hard, feeling a weird thrill, like I was suddenly in a movie, about to uncover a secret. When the lights came back on, Eli was closer, standing just an arm's length away. I couldn't help but notice how the dim light caught the curve of his jaw and the soft lines around his eyes. He looked older than me, maybe in his mid-30s, but there was a youthfulness in his gaze that made me feel like anything was possible. "Have you ever felt like you're meant to meet someone?" he asked quietly. I blinked, surprised by the intimacy of the question. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I guess I've felt that way before, but I always thought it was more coincidental than fate." He nodded slowly, as if he'd heard that answer 1,000 times. Sometimes, it's the coincidences that are the most important. They're like little nudges. I wanted to ask him what kind of nudges he meant, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the moment. I pulled it out to see a message from my best friend, Tom. "You heading out soon?" I smiled faintly. "I should probably get going," I said reluctantly. Eli nodded, but there was a hesitation in his eyes, like he wasn't ready for the night to end either. "Maybe I'll see you around, Mark," he said, his voice softer now. "I hope so," I replied, meaning it more than I expected. I watched him push his cart away, the soft wheels squeaking against the concrete floor, disappearing down the hallway into the shadows. And just like that, the basement felt emptier than before. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Every time I tried to type, my mind drifted back to Eli. The way he smiled, the way he spoke, that impossible suggestion that he'd seen me before, somewhere other than this office. I even found myself wandering toward the side door, half expecting to run into him again, but of course, there was no sign. I told Tom about it that evening over drinks, and he laughed. "Dude, maybe you just had a weird late-night hallucination. Or you're secretly into janitors and you didn't know it." "Ha ha," I muttered. But honestly, I wasn't joking. There was something about Eli that refused to leave my head. Over the next week, I started noticing little things around the office, like the janitor's cart always being in the same spot during the day, even though I'd never met the guy before. And once, on my lunch break, I spotted a pair of worn sneakers tucked under a staircase near the loading dock. They looked like they'd seen a lot of miles. One rainy evening, I found myself back at the building again, the weird pull stronger than ever. This time, I didn't hesitate when I heard the shuffling sounds. I walked straight to the basement entrance, heart pounding, and called out, "Eli?" There was a pause, then a soft reply. "I was wondering when you'd come back." I smiled, even though no one could see me. Whatever this was, whatever strange thread had tied me to this guy, I wasn't ready to let it go, and honestly, I didn't think I ever would be. His voice was quiet but steady, like it was coming from some invisible corner of the basement that held a bit of warmth, despite the cold concrete walls. I stepped down the stairs, the fluorescent lights flickering again, and there he was, Eli, leaning against a pillar, the janitor's cart parked beside him. "Wait, how do you know my name?" I asked, surprised I hadn't thought of that before. He smiled that same gentle smile. "I remember details. It helps me feel connected." I couldn't tell if he was being cryptic or just plain mysterious, but something about the way he looked at me made me want to lean into the mystery rather than run from it. "Are you always here after hours?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Not always," he said, "but sometimes the night holds things the day won't." I wanted to ask him what that meant. I wanted to dig deeper, but for a moment I just watched him. The way his eyes caught the light, the slight crease between his brows, the subtle way he exhaled like he was letting something go. Finally, I blurted, "Why do you say you've seen me before?" "Where else?" He hesitated, then gestured toward an old, dusty couch tucked in the corner. "Sit." I did, the worn cushions sighing under me. He sat next to me, closer than I expected, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt possible. "I don't know if you remember your dreams clearly," Eli said softly, "but sometimes people meet in dreams, in memories that never fully belong to one place." I blinked, trying to keep up. "So you think we met in a dream? Like some kind of shared memory?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe, or maybe somewhere lost in time." The way he said it pulled me in. It wasn't some cheesy line or a pickup artist trick. It was raw and real, like he was trying to make sense of something just as confusing to him. I don't even know what to say to that, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Sometimes the best things start when words fail. There was a pause, and in that pause, I realized I didn't want to break the moment. The basement, with its flickering lights and stale air, suddenly felt like the most alive place in the world. So, Eli, I said, what brought you to this building tonight? Besides cleaning, I mean. He looked at me like I'd just asked a question he'd been avoiding. I guess I was hoping to find someone. Me? I tried not to let the surprise show. Why me? Because sometimes people carry pieces of others with them, even if they don't realize it. I laughed nervously, feeling my cheeks flush. You sound like a philosopher janitor. He smiled wider this time, and I swear, the way his eyes crinkled made my heart skip. Maybe I'm more than that. Before I could say anything, the stairwell door creaked open, and a rush of cold air swept in. For a second, I thought we'd been caught, but it was just the wind. Or maybe the city reminding us it was still out there, alive and buzzing. Eli stood up, stretching his arms above his head. I should finish up soon, but I'm glad you came back. Me too, I said honestly. He pushed the cart slowly toward the exit. There's something about you, Mark. Something I can't quite explain, but maybe that's the point. I wanted to reach out and grab his hand, to tell him I felt it too, that strange pull between us, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched him disappear into the hallway, the sound of the cartwheels fading until all that remained was silence. The next day, I found myself glancing at the clock more often than usual, counting down the hours until I could see him again. I knew it was ridiculous. Eli was the janitor, a guy the first barely knew, working hours when most people were long gone. But there was something about him that made the fluorescent office lights feel dull and lifeless. That night, I stayed late again, pretending to be buried in emails while sneaking peeks at the stairwell entrance. When the faint sound of wheels squeaked across the floor, my heart leapt. Hey, I called softly as he appeared, pushing his cart. Hey, Mark, Eli replied, looking genuinely happy to see me. We ended up wandering the halls together, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations that feel easy and right even when you barely know someone. He told me about his life in bits and pieces, how he'd been working as a janitor for a few years, how he liked the quiet of the building at night, how he sometimes felt invisible during the day but wanted to be seen. Eli leaned close and said, I think the universe has a funny way of bringing people together, even when it doesn't make sense. I looked at him, the city's glow reflecting in his eyes, and I believed him. Maybe I had seen him before, in dreams, memories, or someplace that didn't exist anymore. But right now, in this moment, with the janitor who wasn't just a janitor, it felt like the start of something real, and I wasn't ready to let it go. After that night by the window, something shifted between us. Not in some dramatic overnight way, but more like the slow pull of a tide you don't really notice until you realize you're already knee-deep. I kept finding excuses to stay late at the office, sometimes finishing work, sometimes just wandering the quiet halls hoping to catch a glimpse of Eli. One evening, as I was about to leave, I found him sitting on the same old couch in the basement, head tilted back, eyes closed. The janitor's cart was parked a few feet away, abandoned for the moment. I hesitated, then called out softly. Hey. He opened his eyes and grinned that easy, warm smile. Hey, Mark. Didn't expect to see you. Could say the same, I said, settling down beside him. You okay? He nodded, but something in his expression told me he wasn't quite. Just thinking. Nights like these make me wonder about the past and what's waiting for us ahead. I wanted to ask more, but instead, I just sat with him in the quiet, letting the silence stretch between us comfortably. It felt different from the usual awkward pauses I had with most people. Not heavy or tense, just calm and steady. So, I said after a while, what do you think it is about me? Why did you say you'd seen me before? Eli looked over, eyes serious now. I don't know. Maybe I'm grasping at straws. Or maybe some part of us remembers things our brain doesn't. I laughed softly, the idea ridiculous yet somehow comforting. Like we're connected on some level deeper than memory. Exactly, he said, like echoes in a canyon. We hear them without knowing where they came from. There was a strange beauty in that thought, and I found myself wanting to believe in it. Because honestly, life was messy enough without everything needing to make perfect sense. Over the next few weeks, our after-hours meetings became routine. I'd find Eli in the basement or wandering the hallways, and we'd talk about anything and everything. He told me about his childhood in a small town, how he'd moved to the city for a fresh start, and how janitorial work gave him a strange kind of peace. I shared stories about my own quiet struggles, my dreams of doing something meaningful, and the loneliness that sometimes gnawed at me, even in a crowded office. One night, as the clock hit midnight, Eli pulled out a small, worn notebook from his jacket pocket. "I write sometimes," he said, flipping through the pages. "Thought maybe you'd like to see." I leaned in, intrigued. The notebook was filled with poems and short stories, simple, honest, and full of quiet longing. I was surprised by how much his words resonated, like he'd captured feelings I didn't even know I had. "This is beautiful," I told him, looking up. "Why haven't you shared this with anyone?" He shrugged, a little shy. "Not many people ask to see. Well, I'm glad I'm one of them." That night, as we sat side by side, I realized I was falling for him. Slowly, surely, like the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. But with that realization came a flicker of doubt. Eli was the janitor. I was the marketing guy. Our worlds didn't exactly line up neatly, and the city was full of social rules and unspoken boundaries. Would it even matter if I told him how I felt? Would it scare him away, or worse, make things awkward between us? I kept my thoughts to myself that night, deciding to enjoy what we had without rushing into anything. A few days later, I found Eli sitting outside the building, smoking a cigarette despite the cold. I joined him, offering a lighter, and we shared a quiet moment watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. "You've been quiet lately," he said after a while. "Just thinking," I admitted. "About us, about everything." He looked at me, eyes searching. "Are you scared?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah. I don't know if this is something I'm supposed to want, or if I'm just making a mess of things." Eli reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. Sometimes the mess is where the magic lives. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. I leaned in, heart pounding, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of places. Our lips met softly, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was nothing like the smooth, perfect kisses you see in movies. More real, imperfect, and full of promise. When we finally pulled apart, Eli smiled, his eyes warm and a little vulnerable. "I've been waiting for that." I laughed, breathless. "Me too." From that night on, everything felt different. The office wasn't just a building anymore. It was the place where I found something unexpected. Someone who saw me, who understood me in a way no one else had. But as the days went by, I also realized that every moment with Eli was a delicate balance. We had to navigate the unspoken lines between our worlds, the judgments of others, and our own fears. Still, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And maybe that was enough. It wasn't long before the reality of our situation started to sink in. I mean, here we were. Me, a guy who spent most days in a suit and tie, and Eli, the janitor who worked after hours, quietly slipping through the building's empty corridors. The contrast between us was obvious, and I couldn't help but wonder what people would say if they knew. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk when Tom popped his head over the partition. "So, any exciting late-night office adventures lately?" he asked with a grin. I almost choked on my coffee. "What? No, nothing like that," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You've been acting kinda different." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but inside I was buzzing. Different? Yeah, that was putting it mildly. That night, I told Eli about Tom's comment when we met in the basement. We were sitting on that same old couch, the janitor's cart parked nearby as usual. "Are you worried about what people will think?" Eli asked, his voice low. "More than worried," I admitted. "I don't know how to explain this to anyone. I mean you and me. It's not exactly the usual story." He chuckled softly. Since when has our story ever been usual? Touché. But still, the uncertainty gnawed at me. I realized I'd been so caught up in the quiet moments with Eli that I hadn't thought much about what came next. A few days later, I found myself at a small coffee shop after work, waiting for Eli. We'd agreed to meet there, away from the building and the janitor's cart and all the weird magic of the basement. It felt like a test, seeing if what we had could exist outside that strange, half-lit world. When Eli walked in, the barista smiled at him like he was a regular. I noticed the way Eli's shoulders relaxed, the way he smiled back with ease. It hit me then. This was his world too, just as much as mine. We took a corner table and ordered coffees. The place was cozy, warm, and filled with soft chatter. It felt normal, but also new. "So," Eli said, stirring his drink, "how's the marketing world treating you?" I laughed. "Busy, soul-crushing at times. But it pays the bills." He nodded. "I get that. My job's the same in some ways. People don't always see the effort it takes." There was a pause, then I asked, "Do you ever worry about fitting in outside the building?" Eli looked thoughtful. "All the time. But I've learned that fitting in isn't the goal. Being true to yourself is." I liked that answer. I wanted to be true. To Eli, to myself, even if it scared me. Over the next few weeks, we started carving out more time together outside the office. Late-night walks, grabbing breakfast on weekends, exploring little corners of the city neither of us had seen before. One rainy Saturday, we found ourselves at a tiny bookstore nestled between two coffee shops. Eli picked up a dog-eared copy of a novel and flipped through it. "You ever read this?" "Can't say I have," I said. He looked up, eyes shining. "It's about people finding each other when they least expect it." I smiled. "Sounds familiar." That day, we sat in a nearby park, rain lightly tapping the leaves above us. We talked about everything. Our dreams, fears, the kind of love we'd always hoped for but never quite found. It felt like we were building something fragile and beautiful, a world just for us. But as the seasons changed, so did the weight of secrets and the fear of exposure. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of a conversation between two coworkers who spotted Eli cleaning near the conference rooms during the day. Their whispers weren't cruel, but they carried the usual assumptions about who belonged where, about what was normal. That night, I found Eli in the basement, sitting alone on the couch, looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "Hey," I said gently, sitting beside him. He sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm invisible, like I don't belong anywhere." I reached out, taking his hand. "You belong with me." He looked at me, surprised, and smiled. A real, unguarded smile. "I want to be proud of us," I said. "No more hiding." Eli nodded, squeezing my hand. "Me too." It wasn't an easy decision, but a few days later, we told a couple of close friends. The reactions were mixed, some supportive, some cautious, but it was the first step toward living honestly. At work, I kept Eli's presence quiet for a while longer. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to protect what we'd built from the unpredictability of office gossip. Still, each time I saw him pushing that janitor's cart or catching his eye in the dim stairwell light, I felt grateful. Grateful for the unexpected, for the way he'd shown up in my life like a quiet storm, shaking everything up. One evening after a long day, Eli and I were sitting on my balcony, city lights twinkling below us. He leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. "Remember when you said I was more than a janitor?" he whispered. I kissed the top of his head. "I still mean it." He smiled. "Then maybe it's time to stop pretending." I agreed. Together, we started making plans. Small ones at first, like dinners with friends, then bigger ones, like moving in together. It wasn't perfect, and there were plenty of moments filled with doubt and fear, but it was real, and sometimes that's all you need. We moved in together about 2 months after that night on the balcony. It felt like the right next step, even though it also felt terrifying. Sharing space with someone is a whole new level of intimacy. Learning their routines, their quirks, how they take their coffee, which side of the bed they prefer. With Eli, it was no different, except that every little discovery felt like folding another piece of a puzzle into place. Our apartment was a small one-bedroom on the quieter side of the city, not far from the office building where we met. There was an old charm to it, the sort of place with creaky floors and a kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon and old wood. Eli insisted on painting the walls a soft blue he claimed reminded him of calm seas, and I couldn't argue with that. At first it was strange having him around all day. I was used to coming home to an empty apartment, the silence wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. Now there was laughter, conversations, and sometimes the clatter of pots as Eli cooked dinner. It was messy and unpolished, but alive. One Sunday morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee. Eli was in the kitchen, humming to himself, making pancakes. I slid out of bed quietly, not wanting to spoil the moment. "Morning," I said, wrapping my arms around him from behind. He smiled over his shoulder. "Morning, sleepyhead." We ate breakfast on the tiny balcony, the city humming softly below. For a while, we just sat, hand in hand, watching the world wake up. But even as things felt right between us, I couldn't shake the tension that lingered just beneath the surface. There were moments when Eli seemed distant, like he was carrying something heavy he didn't want to share. One evening, after a long day at work, I found him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with a distant look. "Hey," I said softly, sitting beside him. "What's on your mind?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's silly, but I got a call from my old job today." I frowned. "Your old job? Before this?" "Yeah." "They want me back," he admitted. "Better hours, better pay. But it's in a different city." I swallowed, suddenly feeling like the ground was shifting beneath us. "And what do you want to do?" He looked at me, eyes searching. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go start fresh somewhere new. But part of me doesn't want to leave you." I took his hand, squeezing it. "We'll figure it out together." But the uncertainty lingered, a quiet storm in the background. The next few days were filled with long talks and endless what-ifs. We weighed the options, trying to imagine a life apart, then together in a new place. The thought of Eli leaving twisted something inside me, a mix of fear, sadness, and something deeper I wasn't ready to name. One night, after hours of pacing and restless silence, Eli finally spoke. "Mark, I don't want to lose what we have." I looked at him, the vulnerability shining through his usual calm. "You won't, no matter what happens." He smiled faintly, but I could tell the weight was still there. That week, we decided to visit the city where the new job was located. We needed to see if it felt like home, for Eli, for us. Driving through unfamiliar streets, I held his hand tightly. The city was different, louder, faster, and somehow colder. We wandered through cafes, parks, and bookstores, searching for signs that this could be the place. At one point, Eli stopped in front of a small park bench and sat down. I joined him, and for a moment, we just watched the world go by. "I don't know if I'm ready to leave everything behind," he admitted. "Neither am I," I said honestly. "But maybe it's not about leaving. It's about taking what matters with us." He nodded, resting his head on my shoulder. Back home, the decision still hung between us. Eli was torn, his heart divided between the life he had and the possibility of something new. One night, a few days before the final call, we sat on the balcony again, the city lights flickering below. "I talked to my boss today," Eli said quietly. "He wants me to start next month." "And what do you want?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes steady. "I want to be with you, wherever that means." I felt a swell of hope and fear all at once. "Then let's figure it out," I said. Together. The day Eli accepted the job, we celebrated with a quiet dinner and laughter that felt like a promise. Moving was hard. Packing up memories, saying goodbye to familiar streets, it was bittersweet. But throughout it all, Eli and I held on to each other, finding strength in the unknown. On the last night in our apartment, we sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and I realized how much I'd come to love this messy, imperfect life with him. Eli leaned his head against mine. "Thanks for taking a chance on me." I smiled, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. "Thank you for showing up." As we closed the door behind us, stepping into a new chapter, I knew one thing for sure. No matter where we ended up, we'd face it together. And that was everything. We settled into our new apartment a few weeks after the move, a modest place with big windows that let in the afternoon sun, the kind of light that feels like a fresh start. Unpacking felt less like leaving behind the past, and more like laying down roots somewhere that could hold all the pieces of us. Eli started his new job, and I found myself adjusting to the quieter mornings without our usual basement meetings, replaced instead by early texts and stolen lunches. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the distance at work reminded us how different our worlds could be, but we made it work because, somehow, the weight of being together made everything else lighter. One evening, after dinner, we sat on the couch, the city humming softly outside our windows. Eli reached out and took my hand. A simple gesture, but it held so much meaning. I looked at him, really looked at him. The way his eyes softened when they met mine, the little crease that appeared when he smiled. You know, he said quietly, I never thought I'd find this. Someone who sees me, really sees me. I squeezed his hand. Me neither. We sat there in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Later, as I lay in bed, Eli's arm draped over me. I thought about everything. The stolen moments in the office basement, the nights filled with uncertainty, the courage it took for both of us to step into the unknown. It wasn't a fairy tale and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Love, I realized, wasn't about grand gestures or flawless timing. It was about showing up, in small ways, every day. It was about finding someone who makes the rough edges softer, who makes the ordinary feel extraordinary. And with Eli, I had found that. Whatever came next, I knew we'd face it together. Because sometimes, the most unexpected encounters, like meeting a janitor after hours and realizing he'd seen you before, turn out to be the moments that change everything. And that's a story worth holding on to.